This is a training video about the Words Up Early key message, be careful with questions. We're going to be talking about why it's important for language and communication development and how we can use it when we're interacting and playing with children. A key aspect of the Words Up Early key message, be careful with questions, is that children don't learn language through being asked questions. Questions don't teach language. So if we think back to the key message, play and talk together, and if you haven't heard about this key message or you're needing a refresher, please go back and watch the video training on play and talk together. What we learned in that session was that in order for children to learn new vocabulary and learn language, they need three things to happen simultaneously. So they need experiences, and they need adults to follow their lead and give them the words alongside the experiences, and they need repetition. So those three things need to happen all at the same time. So if we just explore that a little bit again just now. So if we're thinking about those three things, and if we think if a child hasn't learnt a word for something just yet, so if I'm a wee child and I see them, an adult comes alongside and I'm colouring away in my wee red pen here, and I'm asked, what colour is it? So if I don't know the word for red yet, and I'm colouring away, I'm not going to be able to tell you that it's red. So what I need the adults to do, so let's think about, there's the experience, the adults telling me the word, and repetition. I need an adult to tell me that that's a red pen. So I need somebody to say, oh, you've got a red pen. But then I need that repetition within experience. So I need them to say, Sharon, you've got a red pen. You're colouring with a red pen. I love your red picture. And then when I'm playing with the blocks, you've got a red block. And then I need a snack. You've got a red apple. And then you're sitting on the red cushion. And maybe when we're playing in the water, you've got a red brush for brushing the washing. And, everything needs that repetition. So I need lots of people telling me that all of these things are red, to get that repetition in, and lots and lots and lots of repetition until I think, oh, hang on, all of those things are red. And I'm processing all of that information and adding it to my bank of knowledge about what red is, and building up that knowledge. And that needs to happen for all of those words, every word that I come across in every context. The other thing with questions is when we ask lots of questions, our conversation partner can feel under pressure. So if you think about going for an interview, the thing that you might worry about the most is being asked a question that you won't know the answer to, or that you'll give the wrong answer to. There's something about questions that we think that there's a right or a wrong answer to, and quite often there is a right answer to a question. If we think about those quiz shows where you're asked question after question after question, there's often like blooper outtakes of those where people are give like silly answers because they feel under pressure, because it's that kind of bombardment of questions that makes them feel under pressure. So the be careful with question key message strategy aims to kind of reduce that pressure in order to support language and communication development in children. One of the strategies to be careful with questions is to try and use a comment rather than a question. It sounds really easy to sit here and just say use a comment, but actually it's tricky and it takes time to practice. And be careful with questions is often talked about as being one of the difficult key messages to put into practice. And there's a reason for that. It's worth persevering, though. I'm going to say that at the beginning. It is worth persevering. So although people say it's difficult to put into practice, we know that it has a high impact on children's language and communication development. So one of the reasons I think it's difficult to put into practice is because using comments rather than questions is a real change in how we use our language. So if we think about starting conversations, so think about some of the conversations that you've maybe had today with friends or people that you've met out today, or people that you meet when you have go in to start your work or meet your friends or your family. And the conversations that you start with adults usually start with a question with your friends, family, and colleagues. You might have started questions with things like, how are you? How was your weekend? Did you watch that TV program last night? Is your dog better? Do you want a coffee? Wow, I love your shoes. Where did you get them? They're all questions. And pretty much 100% of the time, they work and adults answer them. When we think about starting a question, then, so say we have a toolbox in our head that says how to start a conversation, it's full of questions. And so we go into that toolbox of like, I'm going to start a conversation, and we pull out a question and it works. When we talk to children, we go to that toolbox to start a conversation and we use a question, but it doesn't often work. So we ask our children a question and they don't often respond. And sometimes we get an answer that doesn't make sense, it doesn't match the question. Sometimes we don't get an answer at all. And yet we follow it up with another question, because when we go back to that toolbox, it still says ask a question, because 100% of the time when we use it with adults, it works. And it's really hard to make a change. So people don't really like making change. It's really tricky to make change. And even things like, how many of us have tried to make changes in terms of New Year's resolutions, or I'm going to change and have a healthier diet, or I'm going to maybe not drink wine during the week, or I'm going to go out running, or I'm going to make a healthier lifestyle change. Those, making even small changes is a tricky thing to do. So changing the way that we communicate is actually really hard to do. So even making a change where we say, let's just make a comment, it's really difficult to do. So we've got a few things that kind of help. And one of them is this hand that you'll see on the screen just now. So this hand is a graphic that we use to help practice making comments and changing questions into comments. So one of the ideas is that we draw around your hand and we put a question in the middle that we maybe use quite a lot of. Or we think, maybe this is a question that I think I've used this with my child and I know that they don't answer. So maybe it's what did you do at school today? What did you do at nursery? That's a common one that we get asked about that children don't really respond very well to. And we put that question in the middle and we can change it into these 5 different types of comments. So you can see we've got exclamations. We've got exclamations. We'll come on to talk about these a little bit more. Labels or names, describing what the child is doing or has done, describing for your own perspective, and then we've got this little kind of one at the bottom that says, I wonder. So to talk about this a little bit more, so exclamations are things like, wow, look. So like a real wow, attention grabbing kind of thing, an exclamation. Label or name is just saying what it is, just describing exactly what's there. Describing what the child is doing or has done is literally just describing from the child's perspective exactly what the child is doing or has done, what you can see has happened, what you know the child has done. Describing from your own perspective is things that you can see, things that you've done, things that you like to do. And then the I wonder is almost like a get out of jail card and is the easiest comment to do. And so instead of saying the question of, what did you do at nursery? You can say, I wonder what you did at nursery, and just kind of leave it a little bit hanging. After any comment, what we would do is leave that pause and wait that we've talked about on another video. If you haven't watched that yet, please feel free to go and watch the pause and wait key message video. So these are what some of the comments might look like that we've just been talking about. We said some exclamations. So like we said, there's look or wow. And it could just be, if we're thinking about keeping our language at our child's level, it might just be a look with the pause and wait, or a wow with a pause and wait. But you might add a little bit more language onto that. So you could be, look what I can see, or, like a little bit longer, or look at that. to grab a child's attention. We've got label things you can see and hear. So look, a cat, or jumpy frog, oh wow, I can see things over there, or I can see a red bus driving past. So anything that you can see in the environment, anything that you can see and hear. Talking about something your child is doing. So you like the dog, you're jumping, you're running round and round in circles, anything that you can see that they're doing, or I can see you are playing football in the playground at lunchtime, if you can see that, they've got muddy trousers. Any of those things that you can comment on about what the child is seeing, the child has done. Talking about what you are doing. So I'm going to tackle you. My favorite color is orange. I really like your picture. You might want to say something about, I had a really busy day today. I had tuna sandwiches for lunch. Is quite a nice way of trying to get children to talk about something that they might have done. And then this I wonder, so wonder out loud. I wonder what you had for lunch. I wonder what you did today. I wonder who you played with at lunchtime. Remember, at the end of these, a comment is always followed by a pause and wait, so we get those balance of turns in communication. So we're talking about the key message, be careful with questions. And we've talked about changing our questions into a comment, followed by the pause and wait. But there will still be times when we use a question. They're not going to disappear. And it's important to think about understanding of questions and how that develops as children's language and communication skills develop. We know that children's language and communication develops quite rapidly in the early years and develops from children not using words and using pre-verbal communication. So using that non-verbal communication, pointing, laughing, smiling, facial expression, leading you to things, all the way through to using short sentences. And actually understanding of question words develops throughout that time as well. So children aren't always going to be understanding questions right from the word go. And you'll see on the screen a wee stepped approach to questions and question words. And there's a wee thing to think about using the right questions at the right time for children. So you'll see at the bottom we've got the comments that we've already talked about, because they can be used at any stage of development. The first kind of rung of the steps, we've got choices. So that's about saying to children, do you want to play with the animals or the bricks? So we've got the two things. Do you want the animals or the bricks? And we would show the children what they want, the two choices as well. Or at snack time, do you want milk or water? So we would be showing those two things. Now that's the first type of question that children will understand. And there will be young children who are just developing language who don't quite understand that choice yet. And they might say the last thing that you've said, but they're not actually wanting that thing. So with kind of that, do you want the animals or the bricks? They'll say bricks, but they'll reach for the animals. And that's why it's important to show the choice alongside. So that's the first type of choice that develops, first type of question that develops. Once children are able to understand choices, they then begin to give a reliable kind of yes-no response and be able to understand yes-no questions, so that when we start asking toddlers, do you want to go outside? And they say yes, or they say no, and we kind of don't get them ready to go outside, and then they actually did want to go outside. So that takes a wee while to develop. And then we get into what we call the WH questions. So children start to understand the what questions, so they'll kind of what is it, and then the where, and then the who, and then the when. And they're all developing in that order. And then we have right at the top these kind of why and how questions. Now they're right at the top of the steps. And the reason for that is when the why and how questions involve children being able to predict things and think about how other people would see things, and so why did something happen and how does something happen? You have to be able to predict, and they're really quite tricky to understand. And it's typical that children in the preschool years wouldn't be able to understand those type of questions. You may get children who will use why. You'll get those children who say, but why, and but why, and but why, and we'll keep asking those questions. And that will be because they've heard it. And they've heard it lots of times, so they'll repeat it. And they'll keep asking. So you'll think you've given an answer, and they'll ask why again, and then you'll be like, oh, you'll tie yourself in knots trying to answer it. And that'll be because they've heard it lots of times, but they're not really understanding it. And they'll be the ones where sometimes you might ask those questions. You might ask, why did you do something? And they'll just say, I did it. And it'll be really hard because they don't really understand the question yet. So it's thinking about when children are ready to be asked those questions. And it may be that when we're asking these questions, we ask a question to our children, and we have our pause and wait. So we're counting up to 10 seconds in our pause and wait, and we're thinking, oh, I'm pausing, waiting, and I'm thinking, actually, my child's looking at me, or the children are looking at me, and I'm not getting a response, or I'm realizing that perhaps that was a too tricky question. They weren't developmentally ready for that question. What we can do is, if we were going up steps and it was getting too tricky and we were struggling, what we would do is come right back down to the bottom of the steps. So we change that question into either a choice or a comment. So for example, if I was reading a book and I said to the children, who's in the story? And I pause and wait, and I don't get a response to that question, or they don't, they give a wrong response, so I know that they're not really understanding that who question. What I can either do is use a comment right at the bottom, and I can say, oh, I can answer it myself, and I can say, oh, a rabbit's in the story. Or I might use a choice question to make it easier. So I could say, who's in the story? I pause and wait, nobody answers that question. I can then say, either it's a rabbit, or I can use the choice and say, is it a rabbit or a dog? So I'm making that an easier question. So you come back down the stairs, and it works through all of those questions. So I might say, how did you come to school today? No answer. And I could say, did you walk or did you come in a helicopter? So whenever the questions I realize they're too tricky, I come right back down and use either a comment or a choice to make that an easier question. So thinking about making it developmentally appropriate. So the idea with the Words Up Early key message, be careful with questions, is to try to use a comment followed by a pause and wait for your child to take a turn. If you use a question, to make sure it's developmentally appropriate for your child's communication level, and to remember the pause and wait after your comment. This is a video of Be Careful with Questions in action. Notice in this video, Dad is using lots of comments, and the girl uses comments too. There are times in the video when the girl doesn't name things correctly, or she attempts to name items and it's not clear. If Dad had used questions, she wouldn't have been able to answer. But with comments, the interaction keeps going. This is a video clip. You can click on the link to watch. In this clip, Mum uses comments to describe what her child is doing and to describe what she is doing, rather than asking questions. There's lots of opportunity to repeat language for the child to hear and to learn. So to recap, Be Careful with Questions is about the adult using a comment rather than a question. If you're using a question, thinking about it being developmentally appropriate for your child's communication level, and remembering to pause and wait after your comment. Have a go over the next few weeks. You'll probably notice that initially you'll just notice that you're using lots of questions. Don't be too hard on yourself. It is a tricky strategy to put in place. Noticing that you're using questions is actually a really good first step. Persevere. It will be worth it on the journey to supporting your child's language and communication development. Please watch the other Words Up early key message training videos. You can also contact the local speech and language therapy department. There's also a Just Ask inquiry line on a Tuesday afternoon for child development concerns.